Moscaritolo, a reporter at SC Magazine, and today I'm here with Chester Wisniewski, and he's the Senior Security Advisor at Sophos.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. You mentioned earlier that there have been a couple shifts in the threat landscape. So kind of tell us about those shifts and what IT security professionals really should be focusing on right now.
Well, I think we've seen a couple of changes. I mean, everyone's talking about how the attacks have moved to the web. We're not getting as much, infected email and things like this these days. But more important than that, I think that the trend is to change from them trying to break into our networks and instead is trying to trick people into bringing in the malicious content or accidentally leaking the data. So the criminals have figured out that we're pretty strict with our email filtering now. We've got really good gateway solutions in place. Our firewalls are locked down to not have holes open into servers and random desktops in the environment. And of course, we're not perfect at this, but we've gotten pretty good at stopping things from trying to bust down the door and get into the network. So we've really seen the tactic change where it's now about tricking the user to go out and bring the bad stuff in because we haven't adjusted our outbound rules the way we should, right? We have these firewalls, but we allow users to go anywhere on port 80, anywhere on the internet that they want, perhaps. I'm not saying this is true for everyone, but the large majority, the average business, has spent a lot of time trying to figure out the stopping they're coming in, but is pretty lax about trusting their users to decide when they go out to let them go out where they want. So the criminals are taking advantage of that, really.
How are these attacks being carried out?
A lot of it's being done on the web, and a lot of it's kind of combination. So there may be, they may have a lead-in email that doesn't have anything malicious or infectious about the email at all, but it gets the user to browse to some site that's been compromised. A lot of it's social engineered as well. We see a lot of things using social networking to get information. So it really partly depends on how targeted the criminal is and what they're looking for. If they're trying to compromise an individual at a company, similar to what we saw, say, in the Aurora attacks with Google and things back at the beginning of this year, they'll use tools like LinkedIn to do research about people and figure out who their coworkers are, who they might trust, or how to enough information potentially even to impersonate them. Whereas if it's a more broad-scale attack, it's typically trying to infect mass popular websites or advertising networks and that kind of thing that the user might be visiting.
And so what should IT security professionals do? What are some best practices to combat this threat? Does it come down to user education?
User education never hurts. Certainly telling users that if it seems too good to be true, it probably is a nice starting point.
Mm-hmm.
But even simple things like the firewall stuff, you look at this and we see so much spam coming from corporate networks that are infected with bots. Well, firewalls shouldn't allow outbound email. We all have Exchange servers or Notes servers, or even some of us use Gmail to host our email. We don't need every individual computer to be able to send an email anywhere on the internet, right? They should be centrally controlled. So those firewalls could be used to be tightened up to be looking at what's egressing the network rather than what's trying to come in to get a little better control that way. Certainly informing the users and looking at what your web strategy is, like how are you filtering web. A lot of organizations have put in gateway appliances and stuff for when you're on the network. Do you have policies in place? Do you have any technology on your laptop? Since so many of us are mobile now, like I don't have a desktop computer anymore, and I don't think that's that uncommon. Like many of us are working from the Marriott and the Starbucks and
Mm-hmm.
McDonald's or wherever we might be, and looking at that corporate firewall isn't protecting me when I'm at McDonald's, and that corporate firewall or that web filter at the edge may not be protecting me when I'm there either. So kind of having a holistic view, and there's no way to dig a moat around the network anymore.
Mm-hmm. So what are some of the other main trends that you're seeing out there?
Aside from that, I mean, a lot of it's social engineering again. I mean, there's just so much of that going on these days with the Facebook and the Twitter and LinkedIn and all these different networks. And we're seeing the sophistication of the way the criminals operate as kind of a new challenge, and that they've really become very, very professional.
Mm-hmm.
And they've kind of specialized into groups, and you almost have like, it's just like working for a company, these guys are operating, and it's like, one guy's job is to find an exploit to expose a network to something that might not be patched, find a new exploit, this kind of thing. Another guy's job is to write the malware. Another guy's job is to figure out who to sell the data to once it's been stolen. They very much compartmentalized, and I think the result of that is they're kind of moving away from targeting the more easily patched stuff like Microsoft. Most of us have a little thing automatically on our home computer, use Windows Update, just apply the updates when they're available. And in the corporate environment, we're using tools like WSUS from Microsoft to help us make sure we can, uniformly roll those out across Active Directory in our domains. But do we have the same thing in place for Adobe Flash, for Apple iTunes, for Java? Some companies have the tools and they're not using them. Some don't even have the tools. There's not a lot of simple answers to this, and I think the vendors are starting to try to, the ones that are being targeted, of course, now it's important for them. Adobe's got a lot of new initiatives with Flash and Acrobat to make it easier for IT administrators, and I think that's maybe a tip of a coming iceberg of all these other guys, including Apple and Oracle and the rest of them, trying to figure out ways to basically enable the average IT guy to be able to cope with patching this stuff, because they're going to keep targeting whatever is on. So if it's on millions and millions of desktops, then you know that if there's a problem with it, that these guys will take advantage of it.
So there is a shift from targeting Microsoft to focusing a little bit more on other applications. Now, what can IT security professionals do to combat that problem?
Well, I recommend, one, doing an audit, especially if you've got users that are administrators, and figuring out what you have and where the redundancies might lie and what tools are actually important as business applications. I was looking at some data from one of our customers, and they had Shockwave deployed on almost all of their computers in their network, and I said, well, what things do you use that use Shockwave? Because we haven't really seen Shockwave in use on the web in quite a long time. Everything's moved on to Flash. And they're like, well, I don't know, we didn't need Flash Shockwave. I guess it's part of our standard build image. Why is it part of your standard build image? That's another thing you haven't been patching that can be exploited when these attacks occur. So kind of looking at it that way, or another example might be you want a media player there so people can watch streaming videos. Maybe you don't want that at work, but most of us have a little bit of freedom to have a little bit of personal time when we're at the office, and you might want to enable people to listen to the music and do this kind of thing, but you should try to pick something and not have 7 flavors of different brands all over the network. Just because a user prefers Winamp over iTunes, over QuickTime, over RealPlayer, whichever. Try to standardize a little bit so you can get a grip on making sure those things are up to date, because if there's 50 of them, you're never going to win. But if you can narrow it down and have some reasonable policies, you have a good chance at staying up to date.
And then, on a more positive note, you mentioned that law enforcement is getting better, seems to be improving at catching the bad guys. So you said that it would be a good idea to share information with law enforcement about attacks.
Yeah, absolutely. Sharing information is very, very helpful for the law enforcement community to put all the pieces together. And I used an example with you earlier when we were discussing this, is that sometimes we might know that there's a big spam operation and a botnet operating off of some ISP in some foreign country somewhere. And of course we know that, a lot of our competitors know that, we share that information with each other to protect people. We often share that with law enforcement, but that might not be enough for law enforcement to be able to take international action and coordinate police in multiple countries to necessarily do something about it, unless there's large financial sums involved or something like this. But if customers report to us information that they might not be comfortable coming forward with, they wouldn't want to go public, or necessarily even to the police, they'd rather not have it be known that their company had one of these problems, but they find out information, they can share that with us. Often it allows us to share that then with law enforcement as well, to help us put the pieces of these very complex criminal puzzles together and enable both the security vendors to build that picture and do an investigation and hand over that data to law enforcement. And then often that data will be significant enough that it enables law enforcement to get foreign authorities involved and get cooperation in order to close a case.
So if an organization experiences an incident, a breach, and they maybe don't want to come forward with the information, they may be able to do so through a vendor.
Yeah, I think sharing information with your vendor about the types of attacks that you're seeing and the types of things that are happening to you, aside from hoping that your vendor does a better job of helping protect you, which would be one motive for doing that, is that we do share a lot of information back and forth between vendors, and we also do have working relationships with law enforcement. And those two things, the more of that information sharing that happens both professionally and, or I should say commercially and with law enforcement, I think the more safe we all become, because it enables us to build better tools and to track these guys down and hopefully put a stop to some of this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Chet, thanks for providing this information. It's been very, very good.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks to you for watching. Have a great day.